Good afternoon, everybody. If you're still logging on, we're so glad to have you. For all of you who've already logged on, we're excited to have this conversation, tutoring as an emergency response, a forum held by 50CAN. I am Michael Phillips. I'm the chair of 50CAN board. I'm also an education advocate. Also happen to be a pastor in Baltimore at Kingdom Life Church for over 18 years now. I'm also a founder and CEO of Life Prep, a new set of charter schools that hopefully will be launched in Baltimore very soon. We're in the middle of our charter process, and so we're very grateful to be here. We find ourselves in a moment of crisis, but also, I believe, a moment of opportunity. And the pretext for our conversation this afternoon is really shaped around the lives of families and students who are being impacted by COVID and learning loss as a result. And so today we want to have a forum, a conversation to help and show you some of the amazing work that's being done during this time, and just perhaps a solution to some of that learning loss through tutoring. Right here in Baltimore, we are seeing and witnessing significant learning loss. Across all grade bands, failure has actually increased over this year than it has in last year. From grades 6 through 12, 60% of students failed one or more class this year when we went virtual, as opposed to 38% last year. That's a significant increase. But what's the worst part of the learning loss that we're experiencing here because of COVID is really at the lower levels. Kindergartners and first graders are really suffering significantly because they're not learning, obviously, in person. And the virtual learning process, even though we've had some great gains here, hasn't been significantly rolled out in the way that we would like to see. And so in my church, there are so many students who are being impacted by this, not just intellectually, but socially and emotionally. And so today, we're going to have a conversation to help and discover and to find out some of the practical ways that we can help students through this great opportunity of tutoring. We know that tutoring alone by itself can have significant impact during normal times, but this can also be a tool that we can use during these drastic times. And so you're in store to hear from some great leaders who are on the ground doing this work, and we can't wait to turn that over in just a few seconds. I encourage you to go to 50can.org and read the brief that we put out just early in the year about tutoring as an emergency response to COVID. And I encourage you to do that. But right now, I want to turn this conversation over to the CEO of 50CAN, Marc Magee.
Thank you, Pastor Phillips. So we've got a great hour together. I'm going to put up the agenda. So I'm just going to briefly set up why we're working on tutoring and a few of the principles that Pastor Phillips mentioned in the policy memo we put out. And then we're going to get to hear dispatches from the field from 3 executive directors working in 3 different states. And then we're going to take questions. And, this is a different kind of approach for us. Usually when you hear from me, I'm sending out an email in January and talking about here are our policy goals. And then again in the summer, when we'll share out, this is what we got done and this is what we learned from that. But we know in this very unique emergency moment, we need to make the most of every week and every month that we have. So we thought we'd do something a little different where we're working on a new set of issues on tutoring. And 1 month in, we thought we'd look at what we've learned from that. So the memo is an internal memo that we're making public about advice we're giving to EDs. And then we want to share out what we're learning midstream. And hopefully that can help us and get feedback on the work we're doing, but also help others who are advocating to get ideas that they can bring into their communities. So our approach to tutoring is to really think of it as an emergency response to meet the needs of kids right now, but also with an eye towards what we can put in place that we can continue, because we know the challenges that have been created by this pandemic aren't going to go away as soon as everyone has a vaccine. We're going to be working on these for many years to come. So in the memo, which was written by Liz Cohen, and I would encourage you to think of her as a resource as well. So if you have questions, she is serving as a resource for our executive directors, and we'd love for you to reach out to her as well. That's her email, liz.cohen@50can.org, and you can also find her on Twitter, and she'd be happy to be a resource for everyone on this call. And I wanted to emphasize two key principles that we're thinking about when we're working on this work. So one is the idea of tutoring as something that can be done urgently right now to help kids, but can also be transformational for the way we think about education. So we want to ask the question, what can we do to catch kids up, but why wouldn't we provide this as just part of the package of what you get as part of a public education, is you get this tutoring support. And the other point that's really crucial for us is that local leadership should be driving this. So we can't have a one-size-fits-all approach to tutoring. It can't be just a national program that we run. It really needs to be driven at the state and local level. So what you're going to hear is different approaches to tutoring. And as each of our states picks up and runs with these ideas, they're going to change based on the challenges and opportunities within the communities. So what we're going to hear from is 3 dispatches from 3 different states, as I mentioned. So we're going to start with Victor Evans. He's the executive director of TennesseeCAN. You can follow them on Twitter, TennesseeCAN. And he is been right out of the gate. Tennessee had an emergency session on education, which was incredible, over 4 days. And so he's going to share what they've gotten done already, just 1 month into this year. And then we're going to get to hear from Subira Gordon, working in Connecticut at ConnCAN, about the approach that she's taking with an equity lens towards tutoring and how we can make sure this is a resource all kids can benefit from. And then we're going to finish by hearing from Nicholas Martinez, who's the co-executive director of TEN in Colorado. And he's going to be talking about the work that they've done, building on a year of really looking for expanding opportunities for students, thinking of a comprehensive recovery strategy and how tutoring can fit into that approach. And so once we get those dispatches, then we're going to have a chance to ask questions. And I would encourage you to use the Q&A function as we're hearing from the presentations. Just post your questions, and then we're going to collect those and use those to ask questions to all of our EDs. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Victor Evans, and he's going to share what has been happening in the volunteer state.
Thank you, Mark. We are not wasting any time in the volunteer state. Right in January, we got right after it and started looking at ways in which we can mitigate learning loss. We're approaching 1 year since we all have had to deal with COVID, with schools closing and kids shifting to virtual learning, and it's been tough for all of us. And so we're, TennesseeCAN, we've been just, for about a year, really just looking at ways in which we could weigh in and support parents and families and teachers through this. So our approach has been rooted in 2 themes: provide more supports for kids, and then know where our kids are. And in the 50CAN network, we call that measuring everything. So the current state of learning loss in our state has been pretty striking. So there's been lots of data over the past 9 months just showing how kids have fallen behind. Some districts have released what their student performance data has been, which we were pleased to see that. And then some are kind of keeping that close to the vest, which we do not approve of. But in order to address this learning loss, you need to first acknowledge that there is a problem, that learning loss actually exists. And I mentioned right out the gate, we had a special session to address some of this stuff, and it was important that we did that because kids' lives cannot be put on pause, like the Netflix documentary that a lot of us have been watching during quarantine. So looking at what happened during our special session a few weeks ago, this was strictly to focus on education. There were three bills that for which TennesseeCAN advocated for, that led by the governor. Senate Bill 7001 focused on accountability to ensure that our spring assessment occurs. Again, going back to knowing where our kids are, ensuring that there's not necessarily ties to the teacher evaluation just for this year, it's hold harmless there, but it's important that we know where our kids are. The other bill was Senate Bill 7003, which focused on literacy. And the third bill, which comes to the key of what we're talking about today, focuses on learning loss. So I do want to note that without having a strong accountability framework, we cannot do all the other things like looking at learning loss, like providing tutoring, if we do not have an intact accountability framework. So we'll continue to defend that. So it was time to provide some sort of option. Across Tennessee, you have schools with that are in person. You have some schools that have a hybrid. You have some still that are strictly virtual, and we know that some kids have fallen behind. Kids, in most cases, kids who have been behind even before the pandemic occurred, and unfortunately, those are kids whose situations have been exacerbated by this pandemic. A little information on this legislation. So we're looking at over 200,000 eligible students, and then we're looking at an investment of over $120 million, nearly $120 million invest in this from our general fund and from the LEAP grants from our state. The tutors, which will be certified teachers, will receive $1,000 stipend. As far as the instruction goes, 4 combined hours of in-person daily instruction, intervention, and supplemental supports in reading and math, provided 5 days per week. And a lot of times we run into a situation where it takes a while for things to get going. Not in Tennessee. We're going right after it. The summer learning camps, as we call them, start this summer, early summer, for 6 weeks. 6 weeks, grades K through 4. Getting right after it, and on the front and back end of each learning camp, there's an assessment, one, to know where kids are, where they start, and then know where they're ending. And so looking forward, through this legislative session and beyond, we'll continue to work through the implementation of this learning loss legislation. Again, ensuring that districts continue to release student data. That's important. We can't know where we're going unless we know where we're starting. And then the other thing, we'll continue to ensure that our accountability framework remains intact.
Thank you so much, Victor. It's it's really inspiring to hear all the work that's happened so quickly in Tennessee. We would expect nothing less from Tennessee, which is often leading the way on education policy. And it's great to see them continuing that work and for you to continue that work here on tutoring. So next we're going to go to Subira Gordon, and for the next 2 states, for Connecticut and Colorado, we're very much at the beginning of this work, although we know that we've got to move urgently. So Subira is going to help us have a window for this work in progress in the Constitution state and what they're learning and how they hope things will go over the next few months. So over to you, Subira.
Thank you, Mark. And I also want to just take a quick moment to introduce Hamish McPhail, our Research and Policy Director here at ConnCAN. So Subira Gordon, Executive Director of ConnCAN, and this is a wonderful opportunity to kind of talk about something that's happening right now on the ground in Connecticut. So I want to frame this a little bit to talk about where we are. So in Connecticut right now, similar to what Victor said in Tennessee, students are not where they need to be. There's a lot of learning loss that has occurred. For example, one of our major cities, Hartford, pre-COVID was on track to pre-COVID, their graduation rates were somewhere around 70%. And right now they're looking at a graduation rate of 44%. So that's a drastic change in what the numbers look like. And tutoring is something that has been tried and true. We all know that this is an intervention that really works for kids. A funny story, when I was in high school, I wasn't doing really good in math, and my mom actually got me a tutor, and that's how I was able to pass math and graduate from high school and end up going on to college. But in Connecticut, once many of our districts were able to actually implement tutoring long before the CARES dollars actually became available. So we're focusing on is equitable access to this really great resource that we know will work for students. And this matters for ConnCAN because a lot of the work that we do is about ensuring that all kids in Connecticut have access to a high quality education. So right next door to where I live, the town, they actually have created a 24-hour hotline where parents and students are able to call in and get help with their homework or whatever it is that they need resources for. However, and lots of other places, that's just not what's happening. So we've been working with our State Department of Education closely, and they actually recently have said that the second round of CARES dollars, they're going to require districts to apply for that funding. So it won't automatically go to districts. And one of the things that they're leaning in on is interventionists and tutoring. They're not being really prescriptive, but we've been working closely with them to ensure that whatever it is that they're going to do, it is going to have a high impact on students. So this is not about kind of continuing the status quo. This is about really working hard to ensure that, is it a Saturday academy where you have students able to have access to one-on-one tutors or small group instruction to help them make up for reading and literacy and math? Or is it going to be after school work where there's a tutor that's available after school to help students catch up where they need there? So this is kind of a two-pronged approach. We're also working at the legislature to ensure that there's a learning loss mitigation package that is a part of the legislative package that happens this year. But right now, the work that we're doing, it's possible that this money could go to districts as early as this year. So this school year, we're not looking at the end of the legislative session and then into the next school year. We're looking for interventions to happen right now. And the numbers we're looking at is for a city like Hartford that I just mentioned, they'll get roughly $45 million in CARES funding, or they'll have access to that funding. So this is real money right now that can be spent. And we really think that if the money is spent in the right way, this will really have a great impact in lots of our students. And specifically for low-income students who wouldn't have access to these resources on their own. We really want to make sure that this is intentional interventions and not just looking at what used to work or what didn't work. We have an opportunity right now, as Pastor Phillips said in the beginning, to really be innovative and think about what we can do to make sure that we're reaching kids. And it doesn't need to be in person. That's another thing that we're stressing. It could happen either online or it could be in person if people feel comfortable with that. So there's a lot of ideas floating out there. And I just want to say, we really appreciate the fact that Tennessee took the lead on this. We didn't have to reinvent the wheel. We kind of just looked at what they were doing in their special session towards mitigating learning loss and used that as an example for what could be done in Connecticut. And we're really excited that the State Department of Education has taken something similar to what we wanted to do. And instead of just giving the money out, they really are focusing on where we think it can work.
That's great. Thank you, Subira. And last but not least, we're going to go all the way over to Colorado and hear from Nicholas Martinez of 10. And Nicholas and team have been just doing incredible work. I think, we're used to having one set of goals a year, and it felt like every 2 months they had a new set of goals. And they were starting with, emergency relief and how to get meals to kids. And then it was, how do we get money directly to families, which we'd never done before. And then it was, how do we set up pods and now tutoring. And it's just really inspiring to see the way that the campaign is really stepping up to make every month count. So I'd love to hear from you, Nicholas, on what's going on right now.
Well, thank you for the kind words, Mark. Hello, everybody. Nicholas Martinez, part of the leadership team here in Denver at Transform Education Now. As Mark said, when the pandemic hit, our team kind of jumped into action and started doing what we call wellness check-ins. And so we contacted well over 10,000 families just to check in on how they were doing, making sure that they had the bare necessities. And that included food, shelter, making sure that folks in the home were staying healthy, that they had access to technology, but also kind of checking in on remote learning and making sure that their students and their children were doing okay. And we're, well, I wouldn't say thriving, but we're surviving during the pandemic, especially when it was brand new for all of us. And I think one of the things that continues to be an issue that's brought up is concern about learning loss, which has been mentioned several times already today. And I think families are desperately worried about where their kids are and where their kids' academic progress will be leading to post this this massive disruption that we've all have been living through for the last year. On average here in the metro area here in Denver, students are getting 15 hours or less with a live teacher. That's significant considering what they were getting just last year. The majority of families are wildly concerned about what comes next and are unsure about whether their children will be prepared for that next grade level, whether that's third grade, whether that's eighth grade, or whether that's college and career. And significant numbers of families have spent a lot of money, on average over $1,500, to support and kind of bolster the resources available to their children at home. And so we think that tutoring and specifically high dose tutoring can play a part of a really comprehensive recovery package for kids across our state. And I think that for us, tutoring is about having targeted responses to making sure that our kids have the academic support that they need to be able to catch up, without throwing all of this weight and all of this pressure solely on the backs of our educators. And kind of really leaning in as an ecosystem and saying, like, where can we find additional capacity and support to create the structures and systems that our kids need to be able to be academically successful. So we are working with a number of partners here locally to write a bill that would access $50 million of funding set aside by the Colorado Department of Education to bolster existing or help create new tutoring programs across the state. And this would be an opportunity for districts who have invested in tutoring previously to really expand that and make sure that they're able to offer it to more kids. And if there are schools and districts that want who want to try this and want to make sure that their kids have access to this who normally haven't, that there would be some support from the state to be able to do this as well. And I think the only other thing, this is only a small piece of the puzzle for us. We believe that this has to be part of the focus of our recovery work, but it can't be the only thing. And for us, that includes direct payments to families and making sure that we are supporting our families and communities in every aspect of their need. We have a number of families who are still struggling with food, who still do not have access to technology. And we believe that, let's make sure that our kids are taken care of. Let's solve for the academic piece of this. Let's also make sure that we're not forgetting about the holistic response to support our communities.
That's great. Thank you, Nicholas. And absolutely, I just underline, that tutoring can be a very powerful tool. We know there's a lot of research that says one-on-one or small group tutoring can help catch kids up, but it's not the only thing we need to do. And I think across our network, there's a whole suite of other policies we're working on, including direct support to families. That's going to be crucial. We're just going to have to do a whole bunch of things right now to help kids. Well, thank you. Thank the three of you for giving us those slices into the work you're doing. So I thought we could ask a few questions. So Pastor Phillips and I will do a few follow-up questions, and then we'll open it up to questions from attendees. We've already got a few in the chat box. So I just encourage everyone to just click on that Q&A at the bottom of the screen and type in your question, and we'll work through those. But first, I'm going to turn it over to you, Pastor Phillips.
Yeah, I'll kick the questions off. First and foremost, thank you to all of you for the significant work and contribution that you're doing to curtail learning loss, but just to meet people where they are. I think everyone talked about how you are providing direct services to families, and I think that's absolutely incredible. Victor, my question is to you is, how did all of this come together so fast in Tennessee, and how are you guys able to mobilize so fast to get the ball moving?
Yeah, thank you, Pastor Phillips. So the first step is acknowledging that you have a problem, correct? I mean, it's a tough pill to swallow when you have to admit that, despite all the hard work that district leaders and school leaders are doing to prepare kids, for college or career or wherever they may go, that they're not prepared to do any of that. So the first step is acknowledging the problem. The next step is pulling in all the stakeholders. So obviously the legislature is key. Pulling in district leaders, pulling in school leaders, and then pulling in advocacy groups like ours into the fold. And that's exactly what the administration did. And as a result of that, we were able to, the governor called the special session in December, and then the third week of January, for 4 days, legislation was filed, passed on first consideration, second consideration, moved through brand new committees with a new legislature, right? And keep that in mind. We're a new legislature, so we have new ideas. We have some new leadership in both chambers, and this was still able to get done. So buying into the need to say, it's incumbent upon all of us to answer the call and to get the job done for our kids. That's how you get it done.
That's incredible. Do you see this being able, I mean, obviously Connecticut was able to do it, but are there any other insights to help similar things to be rolled out in other states?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say, again, you need to make sure that you're engaging everyone on the front end. The worst thing that you can do is try and force something where a plurality of people that do not feel like they were brought into the fold, and then even worse, people who are being affected by legislation not brought into the fold. So doing that on the front end, and then ensuring that your legislation is as airtight on the front end as possible. As much as we love to take our policy minds from this webinar and make the best legislation ever, inevitably there's always some amendments that are necessary, be it because the initial version is horrible or just due to technical cleanup. And so being as concise and pulling in all the stakeholders in the front end is super important. And that's where you, that's how you're able to get it done. And that's what I would encourage others to do. Listen to what, the parents are saying, right? Listen to what students are saying, right? And then, listen to what districts are saying, and encourage, the bridge of communication to close that gap. Everyone's for the most part at home right now, so why not put together a Zoom and step up your advocacy game and ensure that those gaps of communication are closed.
Great. Well, maybe I'll jump in with a question, and maybe both to you, Subira, and to you, Nicholas. I'm curious from an advocacy standpoint, what have you seen? Is there a different kind of coalition to this work, or what kind of support have people found? And if you're trying to build support for this in a state, where would you start?
Oh, sorry, sneeze coming on. So I think where we are is right now, every parent who's home is, if your child is at home learning, you have a front seat to what's happening with your child. And I think a lot of parents that we talk to are, if they've kept their child at home, they feel like their student is safe, but they're not really sure if they're learning. And so the parent constituency is incredibly important, and having them engaged in what we're doing is incredibly important. So one of the things that we're doing right now is we're working on a parent survey that will go out to parents to just say, what do you want and how do you want this to look? Also, the coalition for this work, it's interesting because I think it's not like anything that we've done before, because it's kind of like immediate and happening right now. So we haven't necessarily built a large coalition. I know there's a very strong, there is an advocacy out there to not do assessments, but we are partnering with our state Department of Education, who's saying that we should be assessing students to see where they are. So because from our perspective, if you don't do the assessment, you won't be able to know what you're making up for in the end, to ensure that, you know, where is the loss, so you can measure it, and then we can decide how we're going to step in and mitigate what that loss is. So it's just it's a little bit different right now as far as coalition building, but I do want to kick it to Hamish a little bit to talk a little bit about what our survey looks like and like what we're asking parents to talk about.
Hi there. This is Hamish McPhail, the Policy and Research Director for ConnCAN. Yeah, so essentially, you know, we want to make sure that, so hi there. We want to make sure that whatever intervention is done is meeting the demand that parents have, because that's going to be the most effective policy, one that is, you know, welcomed and wanted by the community. And so when the State Department of Ed, you know, ask districts what they're going to use the money for from the Fed to you know, and we want to make sure those essentially are that's public information that families can know and be involved in that process. We're already seeing some promising pieces from around the state where, you know, they're building community conversations regarding what that mitigation of learning loss will look like, and we want those to be widespread across the state. And then we want to make sure that whatever is done is done with fidelity, so that one, you know, when there are conversations, the district can clearly say, this is what we set out to do. Families were informed and were part of that process, and then families were engaged throughout the process. So, I mean, best case scenario is everybody knows something, right? Nobody is out there, you know, especially now. I mean, parents have seen, as Subira said, firsthand what it means to be a quasi teacher in a lot of ways. And so the more you can democratize that experience of tutoring, and the more you can involve every member of a community, the more you strengthen that community, and the more you strengthen the ties between different nonprofit groups and the district while that's happening. So the best case scenario, I think, is that parents are not just involved in the planning, but are also involved in some capacity in the tutoring itself. We know that, you know, parents have a tremendous diversity of skill sets, and it's about leveraging those skills to have an all hands on deck approach to help kids during this time, and then hopefully embed it further into years to come.
Great, thank you. And any thoughts from you, Nicholas, about the coalition you've seen in Colorado around this, and is it different than other issues you've worked on?
I think it's a lot of the normal players, a lot of the normal folks who are concerned about academic progress and making sure that students have what they need to be successful. But I do want to go back to one of the things and echo what Subira said, that in order for this to work, and you know, we need to really rely on the folks who have been closest to these issues for the longest, and that's families. And I think, you know, as it's been said a couple of times already, families have had a front row seat to their child's education in a way that they've never had before because of this pandemic. And I think they recognize both the need, but also the specific, you know, content. They understand where their kids are falling behind and what it's going to take to catch them up. And I think tutoring can be an opportunity to really kind of provide that targeted support there where our kids need it, and we just need to make sure that we are listening to the folks closest to those problems.
Excellent, great. All right, well, we've got 20 questions in the Q&A. I hope you guys are ready. And so I'll queue them up, and I'll kind of hit you rapid fire, and, you know, give us your succinct answer, and we'll work our way through. So first up is this for you, Victor, and TennesseeCAN team. What assessment tool is Tennessee going to use, and will it be statewide or different by school district?
Thank you for the question, Catherine. So this will be a benchmark state assessment from the department with an opportunity for an innovative assessment through the math screeners and reading screeners that will be on the front end and the back end. But it will be something that will be adopted by everyone from the state.
Very good. All right, question 2. What can parents in Georgia do to get this started in our district or state? So I don't know who wants to take this question, but you know, if you're giving advice to a parent advocate, where do they start?
I would say see how your CARES dollars are being spent, see how your department has decided that this money is going to be spent, and then advocate for the department to spend this money on tutoring. A lot of it, the federal government was not really prescriptive with how the CARES funding can be used. And the state also has a 10% holdback. So if they even had other things that they wanted to do with this money, there is a share that your state Department of Education has for discretionary funding that they can use for this. So I would definitely say that that's the way to go.
Great. Yeah, and you know, the other thing I guess I'd emphasize, and I assume you would agree, Subira, is you can't be too early when you're advocating, but you can be too late. So especially as CARES dollars and other federal funds are being allocated, what would too late be? Do you have a sense of the window, Subira? Is that like a month?
Yeah, I think for us, the money, this is happening way quicker than the initial round of CARES. In our conversations with the State Department of Education, they're trying to get this money out the door like right away. So our application process is going to hopefully wrap up either this week or next week. And then the hope and the thought is that districts are going to start applying and they can get that money out. It's very different than it was the first time around. So I would say if there is a need for this, or you want to see a shift in the work that your department is doing, I would start tomorrow. Make sure that you're reaching out to them and ensuring that this is a priority. And as a parent advocate, I'm sure you know, the more people that you can get to lean in and elevate those voices is the more likely it is that the department will listen.
That's great advice. So question 3, what, other than funding, what have been the challenges in implementing tutoring in districts?
I think one of the questions that we've tried to tackle is how do we make sure that this reaches as many kids as possible? Oh, excuse me. We know that, you know, we are working with a finite budget. We know that, you know, that there is a labor force constraint here as well. And so how can we make sure that we expand this in a high quality capacity to reach as many kids as possible? And I think that's something that we are working on, leveraging different existing programs, different existing kind of partners and structures across the state to be able to provide both people, right? Like the people power to be able to do this, to reach as many kids as possible, and making sure that our districts and our school-based partners have the training and the resources to make sure that the supports that students are receiving are high quality.
Excellent. So this is a question directly for Tennessee. Curious to know who is staffing the tutoring now and the summer learning camps. Is it required to be Tennessee teachers from specific schools? Could certified teachers tutor virtually?
Thank you for the question, Elizabeth. I should have done this earlier, and my apologies. But one of my team members, Erica Berry, is on as well. She is our Senior Director of Policy, and I will kick this question to her for her to answer.
Thanks, Victor. So right now we have the Tennessee Tutoring Corps, which is not directly affiliated with the Department of Education. And so with the Tutoring Corps right now, those are just college students. But what the bill that Victor discussed, that will lead into the more formal tutoring program that is administered by the Department of Ed. And those teachers will, or those tutors will be teachers. They have to be certified, licensed, and endorsed. If a school district cannot find a certified teacher to lead these tutoring programs, they can then reach out to candidates in educator prep programs or somebody who has a bachelor's degree or college degree and has gone through a course that's developed by the department, which is, I think they're calling it a learning loss remediation course. So that makes us feel a little bit more comfortable that they are controlling for quality, but also giving districts flexibility in who can serve these students.
Excellent. Thank you, Erica. So next question up. So emergency tutoring already exists outside of a pandemic school year in theory for homeless and foster youth. Some states have laws saying schools may provide tutoring to these students, but we know it doesn't always happen. Assuming funding is made available, how can we ensure that schools actually use it?
So one of the things that I think is really important here is the demand, right? We have to demand, like we have to have parents demand what they need. And I think we kind of talked a little bit about our survey. This is no critique to a specific school district, but what it's going to take us out of this learning loss is going to be a lot different than the way things were before. So this is something that I think the parents and those of us who are advocates really have to lean in and make districts understand that this is incredibly important and it's what's needed. And I think quality is incredibly important. And here in Connecticut, I will say we haven't necessarily solved the question about who, but we do know that this is something that we're going to have to lean into. I think as long as we're being able to ensure that the tutor is a person who is able to be around kids to like do a background, I think we just have to figure out how to just create a space that if you are able to, you can, instead of putting up more and more barriers to say that you need to check a number of boxes to be able to do this. But I think the demand issue is going to be incredibly important, and how we measure that right now, I don't think we necessarily have a mechanism, but just to ensure that parents are leaning into their districts and leaning into the State Department of Education and asking the questions and saying, hey, this is something that I need. My child would like this intervention. And I think it's hard, a district will be hard pressed to not do exactly what the parents want, specifically because they are getting the money for this emergency use right now. This is not their normal, regular way of funding education.
That's great. Thank you, Subira. So next question up, are you working with individual tutoring companies to support local schools? And we also got a question that I'll combine that, which is, as you probably know, not all tutoring programs show strong academic results. What are each of you doing to ensure that there are key guardrails in place to ensure any tutoring programs adopted in your states are grounded in what research says?
So we are still just on the very beginning of this journey and haven't necessarily worked with private tutoring companies. But I think when we talk about what makes tutoring successful, there's a couple of key things. It's multi-week, right? Like you're not meeting with a tutor just once a week. It's multiple times throughout the school week. It's happening during the school day. I mean, I think for us, that is an issue of access and equity. You know, if you are having to, you know, go find the tutor, you are having to access this outside of a normal school day. You know, students with varied circumstances, that's often kind of preventing them from accessing their tutors. It's small group instruction, right? No more than 5 students being tutored at once. I often think about like study hall, right? You know, the study hall many of us had where, you know, we were there working, but, you know, not really getting that direct kind of targeted support that we needed. And then the training, and which has been mentioned a couple of times today already, is going to be so important that we get this right and that we make sure that the folks who are delivering the tutoring resources are both trained and supported is key. And then I think the last thing for us is it's the same tutor, right? That's in the same way that, you know, you get familiarity and you build a relationship with the teacher in the classroom, building that relationship, building that familiarity with the tutor is going to provide a level of consistency that provides that high quality academic outcomes for kids.
Excellent. Thank you, Nicholas. So next question we had was, are there any papers or articles that you can recommend to support the need for tutoring and its effectiveness? So one I would just flag is out of Annenberg at Brown called Accelerating Student Learning with High Dosage Tutoring. So we'll put that out on our Twitter handle at 50CAN. And we'll also see if we can put out a few more today. So stay tuned for those. And also feel free to reach out to Liz, who's keeping tabs and all the best research for that. So next up, we have a question. Can you speak to your support of building a federal program for direct payments to families? So obviously, I think a lot of people have been keeping tabs. It seems to be emerging as a pretty popular policy idea right now. And you've seen Senator Romney, Senator Bennett providing direct payments. What have we learned from the local level of how do you build support for that kind of idea?
I think it's a challenge, and I also think that it's, I think it's a critical problem that we have to solve for. Right now, as I mentioned, at least here in Denver, families are spending a lot of their own dollars to supplement the learning for their children, since they've been stuck at home in remote learning. I also think that, some of the other challenges associated with the pandemic and remote learning that won't be solved by tutoring specifically, I think can be addressed through direct payments for families. Things like mental health. One of the reoccurring concerns that we have from families across our city is that they're worried about their child's social emotional well-being, their mental health, and they don't have the access to the resources, they don't have the additional income to be able to meet their children's needs in that aspect. I think having direct payments to families can have dividends that are far-reaching and can do a number of things good for our communities, including but not limited to just academics. I think it's not an easy solution. I think there's a lot of folks who believe that the politics of this will get in the way, but I think it's what's right and it's what families need. And I think right now more than ever, we see families staying home to take care of their kids, leaving the workforce. We have to provide an opportunity to supplement that income to be able to take care of their kids when folks have made those types of decisions over the last year.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think one advantage about direct payments is they're pretty easy to explain. They might not be easy to get through, but I think people understand what it could do for them. And sometimes when we're working on education policies, that's not always so clear. So we'll take a couple more questions. I'm going to kick it back to Pastor Phillips to sort of bring us together here. So, we got a two-part question. So part one is, are you broadening the tutor pool for certified teachers only to include non-teachers? And if yes, how are you training them? And part two is, I'm excited to hear about the pre and post tests before and after tutoring. Are these open response assessments to really ascertain learning or multiple choice? All right, so one is about the labor pool and certification, and the other one is a little more detailed question, I think, for Tennessee about the nature of those pre and post questions.
Thank you, Alan, for the question. As far as the tests go, so this is an opportunity for the department to take our typical benchmark tests and then use them to look at ways in which they can administer a more innovative assessment. That's still being discussed as we speak. But as far as those assessments go, yes, the front end and back end open response assessments. Not really sure at this point what the body or the framing of those assessments will look like, but I know that the department is looking at ways to be more innovative with the assessments. And then, yeah, great question about the tutoring, the training on tutors. Yeah, Erica mentioned earlier that the certified teachers teaching pool, and then from there, that's still something that the department is having to work through as they look at what their projections are. Currently, I mean, we're looking at 75,000 students per grade, K through 8. The fiscal review committee estimates that there will be, 30% students, those students are eligible. So we're looking at 200,000 across the state who are eligible for these dollars. And again, mind you, this is a program that's targeted for our lowest performing schools, because as I think I mentioned this earlier, but we're looking at students who are already are behind currently, but we're likely already behind previously.
Excellent. Thank you, Victor. So our next question is, how do your various state approaches attend to both learning loss and the need for students to reconnect socially after many months of isolation? I hear concerns in DC that tutoring misses the more human, social, emotional needs of students who have been away from school for a full year. So that's a great question. Who wants to tackle that?
Well, I can say it's a little different in Connecticut because we've had a pretty large focus on students having the ability to return in person. I think as more people get vaccinated and as more people are able to be in person, I think one of the things we've learned and we've seen that remote learning is just not working for high need students. So specifically, I can speak to our English language learners. So I think for those students, we would really like to see, if possible, and if parents feel safe, to have that be in person. And if we are able to do that, I think that will help. And in person doesn't necessarily need to be one-on-one. I think we're looking at more of like small group instruction. So that will help with some of the reintroduction to the and like some of the social and emotional connections, but this is hard. Like while we're talking about tutoring today, one of the other things that we're looking at for the CARE dollars to be spent on is some of that social and emotional support and mental health supports that families are going to need, because isolation is tough. And specifically, there's a lot of research that shows in the middle school years, it's a hard transition for those students to be separated from their friends. And I think we're going to have to figure out how to do that. But tutoring is not necessarily the only solution, but it can be one of the ways where maybe in a learning pod setting, you can slowly reintroduce students to being around their peers and being around other people and being able to have that social and emotional connection. So we think that's also incredibly important. It's not an either or. I think it's a way to figure out how to do both.
That's great. All right, so we'll do one last question and I'll kick it to Pastor Phillips for our wrap up. So in Atlanta public schools, parents are interested in learning loss programs, but there's pushback on anything mandatory. Parents recognize the problem, but some don't want to or don't feel as though they can commit to anything mandatory. What are best practices for getting support from parents for mandatory tutoring or mandatory summer enrichments? So I guess the question is, are any of you contemplating this as mandatory, or is it optional? And then how are you assessing that question of parent buy-in into these ideas, which are going to require obviously commitment from students and parents to go beyond the traditional school time?
I guess I can start us off here. We are not thinking about this in terms of, a mandatory program. Excuse me. I don't think that it is our place to tell families what to do. I think, however, what I have heard from families is this deep concern about academic learning loss for their children. And I think I don't know who spoke about it earlier, but I think one of the key roles of all of us, all of us who consider ourselves advocates, organizers, and working on behalf of community, is to make sure that families know that these opportunities are available to them. And I think that is going to be a key to drive to the demand that I think Subira spoke earlier about. When you know that there is a program like this available, that your child, who you have watched for the last 12 months struggle academically and fall behind their peers, when you know that this is available, I believe that most families are going to be inclined to take advantage of this. And so I don't think we have to make this a mandatory thing. I don't think that we should tell families what to do with their time. I think, we're talking about summertime tutoring, right? Like it's very real that families are going to need a break. Families are going to need an opportunity to just be families again and not have to be stuck in their home 24/7. But I think also letting folks know that there is an opportunity, that there's kids can really take advantage of an incredible programs that is going to, help them long term, I think is going to be the key. And I think that falls on us to make sure that families are aware of all of those opportunities available to them.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Nicholas, and thank you, Victor and Subira, Hamish, Erica, everyone who's working on these issues right now. And thank you for taking time out of your busy days to come and do this. I know we try very hard not to pull you out of the Capitol or out of the work you're doing in the communities. So thank you for making time for this. So I'm going to kick it over to Pastor Phillips to help us bring this home.
So yeah, thanks again, everyone, and to not only to the panelists, but to everybody who, chimed in, asked questions. It was a very, very fruitful discussion, and thank you for contributing all of your thoughts. We want to let you know just a few things before you leave. First and foremost, it is our core beliefs at 50CAN to always share what is working. And so we invite you to share with us what's working in your community or what's not working in your community. We believe this approach because it's one of the ways that we can see programs and concepts that are gaining traction and affecting change in our communities to be replicated throughout the country. And so we encourage you to do that. Also, this conversation was recorded today, and so we encourage you to share it as well. It'll be put up on YouTube, and so please share it, and so that more advocates and educators and communities can become aware of what's available to them and what's possible during this time. And then lastly, I want to ask you to follow us follow us at all of these social media outlets as well, 50can.org, and then of course at 50can on Twitter. Follow us there on social media. Thank you again for joining us, and I'm sure you have a lot to get back to, but it was a great discussion. Thank you so much.